Welcome to the Center for Baptist Leadership Podcast, hosted by William Wolfe. Our mission is to cultivate courageous and biblical Baptist leadership for the 21st century. We aim to revitalize the Southern Baptist Convention from within, defend it from those who seek its destruction, and serve as a better Baptist voice in the public square.
Welcome back to the Center for Baptist Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Executive Director William Wolfe, and this is our next edition of Countdown to Orlando, a weekly roundup of all the major SBC news as we prepare and look ahead for the annual meeting this June in Orlando, Florida. I'll be joined shortly here by guest commentator Jon Whitehead, but first, let me give you some of the top topics that have broken out over the SBC news this week. First, and this will be news for many of you, reports have emerged that leaders from approximately 30 of the largest Southern Baptist churches met to discuss the future of SBC missions giving and funding beyond the traditional cooperative program model. The reports we've heard are that these churches met with individuals like Kevin Ezell, Paul Chitwood, and Jeff Orge in Dallas for this off-the-record meeting last fall. And the details of this meeting remain fairly closely held, but it's being widely shared that this meeting happened. And this gathering signals that frustration with the cooperative program pipeline, particularly the state convention overhead, has reached a tipping point among many of the SBC's biggest givers. And this dovetails with the January 2026 cooperative program receipts report that came in at $19.3 million. Now, this was 1.7% above the monthly budget target. However, year-to-date giving remains slightly below budget at $63.6 million, a shortfall of roughly $467,000. Designated giving, which is a big issue that Jeff Orge addressed last year that caused quite a bit of consternation amongst many faithful Southern Baptist pastors and churches, has now hit $23.7 million in January, which is nearly $1 million higher than this same month last year. So the designated giving issue is not going away. We've also seen this week that trial dates have been set in two major SBC-related lawsuits. Former SBC President Johnny's Hunt defamation case against the SBC and Guidepost Solutions goes to trial September 22nd. And former SBTS Professor David Sill's defamation suit against the SBC, SBTS, Lifeway, and former presidents Bart Barber and Ed Litton is scheduled for November 10th. Both of these cases will test the boundaries of SBC institutional communication about abuse-related allegations. And then we see that next week, the Southern Baptist Convention Executive Committee will be meeting February 16th to 17th in Nashville, and this will be the last Executive Committee meeting before Orlando. The Monday evening session features an update from Executive Committee President Jeff Orge and a sermon from SBC President Clint Presley. And Tuesday morning will include the financial and legal updates and any remaining motions before the 2025 annual meeting. So stay tuned for that. I'm sure there'll be some very interesting reports coming out at the Executive Committee meeting next week. Also, this last week, we saw Jacksonville pastor Heath Lambert release a tongue-in-cheek video suggesting that the Southern Baptist Convention should rename itself. He released a teaser video that caught a lot of people's attention, stirring up no shortage of contention because we've seen proposed name changes before, usually coming from the wing of the Southern Baptist Convention that, for some reason, are ashamed of being known as Southern Baptists. But that's not what Heath was doing. When the full video dropped, Heath suggested, because names matter, that the Southern Baptist Convention should rename itself Baptist Debating the Existence of Women Pastors Convention, or BDUP for short. Not exactly catchy, but that wasn't really the point. Because as we've seen, when we've made any amendments to Baptist Faith and Message to tighten up our language about who can serve a pastor, they've passed overwhelmingly. But the constitutional amendment process that Mike Law undertook for multiple years and then Juan Sanchez picked up, despite getting majorities, large majorities, they failed to clear the supermajority required. And so here we are now 5 years into this debate, still trying to figure out if Baptists do or do not believe in the existence of female pastors. And then finally, for our top news stories this week, we saw that Will McRaney filed a petition with the U.S. Supreme Court on January 8th, asking SCOTUS to review the Fifth Circuit's dismissal of his lawsuit against the North American Mission Board. McRaney claims NAMB interfered in his 2015 firing as the executive director of the Baptist Convention of Maryland and Delaware and disrupted his subsequent employment. The Fifth Circuit ruled 2-1 that church autonomy doctrine shields NAMB, but McRaney is challenging this to the highest court in the land. So joining me now here today for this next edition of Countdown to Orlando is our great friend and great guest, Jon Whitehead. Jon, thanks for being back with us today.
Good to be back here, William.
All right, Jon. So it was a pretty heavy news week here at the Southern Baptist Convention. But last time, as we finished our first conversation, we said we're going to talk about the potential post-cooperative program future of the SBC. So let's dive right into that. And let's dive right into these reports, verified reports of this meeting that happened. And so I just want to set the stage for our listeners. We are talking about something that we knew happened, but we don't know exactly what happened there. We don't know exactly which churches were there, but we've heard it was the top 30 cooperative program giving churches with Kevin Ezell, Paul Chitwood, and Jeff Orge. We've also heard that it was somewhat of a listening session to hear what these biggest giving churches have to say about how things are going. But that's a pretty big piece of information for Southern Baptist. How did you take that, and what do you think it means?
Yeah, so I guess a lot of us have been talking about the dangers to the cooperative program caused by whether that's loss of trust or non-denominational growth, or for whatever reason, the cooperative program has struggled in the past few years. And so in any Baptist system, when the money disappears, then people start looking for the exits. The incentives are, how do I protect what I've got going on, especially if you're inside leadership. And so the theory of the convention is churches decide what program they want to put on. It's their cooperative program. And so what they're willing to fund, that's then what it makes up the budget. But as the money doesn't come in like people hope, doesn't grow as fast as people start looking at the exits, maybe I could raise money over here. How can I raise money over here? And then over the long term, that creates incentives. Well, look, if the convention isn't paying for most of my income, if I've got other donors, why should they get to control us? And so when those situations arise, when times get tight, in the past, history doesn't repeat, but it does rhyme. In the past, we've seen efforts to reduce accountability to messengers, to, in essence, break away or have more independence from messengers, to kind of do things off the books or through partnerships that messengers don't control. And in the worst cases, back in the 90s and early 2000s, you saw entities break away from their state conventions, try to leave, whether that's Baylor or there's universities in Missouri that did the same, or colleges in Georgia try to do the same. So whenever there's a pullback from economic reasons or loss of trust or generational changes, people start getting dangerous incentives. And everyone's first response is, of course, how do I protect the money I have right now? Wouldn't it be nice if I could take the Baptist money and not have to listen to the Baptist messengers? That's, the Baptist money has always come with the instruction that, but you have to be managed by Baptists. And so there's always thinking, well, how can I ensure I get this money, but also make other money or turn outside? And with that comes the question of, but how do Baptists make sure they stay in control of those institutions, even if they're not supplying all of the funds? And historically, Baptists have said, we will turn down money. We will turn down growth opportunities if it means the messengers have less control. But at every time, every time when there's a reduction in funds, there's always the risk that somebody sweet talks or fast talks somebody into reducing messenger control. So that in the Baptist context, because the Cooperative Program has been shrinking, membership has been shrinking, I think Baptist churches, those who care about the historical Baptist process, the historical Baptist meaning, the old structure of churches are going to define what their mission is, and then our leaders are going to carry that out, as opposed to the leaders telling us what our structure is and are we there to help them carry that out or not. I just think over the next 4 or 5 years, Baptists need to be sensitive that people will be asking these questions and concerns will be growing. And 2, how do we make sure that the decisions that are made about the future are made for the best interest of the average Baptist church, the Southern Baptists make up the convention, and not a small group of leaders or a small group of churches or a small influence group? How do we make sure the decisions that are made about the future protect the interests of Baptists in maintaining the Baptist convention? That's the biggest concern. And now we see meetings like this that's with a small group, and it's off the record, and it's quiet. And I guarantee you somebody had a plan they were presenting, right? You wouldn't hold such a meeting if you weren't going to encourage discussion about what do we do after the Cooperative Program. And those are dangerous discussions, frankly. It's a little bit like the military having discussions of what do we do after America? Well, that's really not a discussion you should be having. That discussion should be happening at a much higher level than inside. And so while I appreciate there are concerns, and in some ways good to start getting opinions, messengers need to exercise control over that process so that the decisions and discussions that are made protect the interests of average Southern Baptist churches, not just a few.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good, like, sort of broad context for it. What do you think you sort of sparked it? So why would Zell and Chitwood and Orge say to the top 30 biggest giving churches in the SBC, we need to get together? Just like briefly, like what would the impetus for that be? Is it just the panic over the rise of designated giving? What's driving this?
Yeah, well, clearly, I guess on one hand, clearly churches are frustrated. Designated giving does indicate something. Again, we've always been willing to accept designated money, but the goal was for all of us to work together towards a common Baptist system so that the messengers had their input, local churches had their input into what it is we're doing. And you wouldn't want that to be dictated by national leaders necessarily. So the plan has always been the messengers set the budget, and then the leaders do the best they can with that budget. And if they've got concerns about funding, you bring that back to the messengers and let them have discussions, as opposed to planning, well, that's going to fall apart. And so there'll be something new. And we not only want that old money, but we're going to invent some new system. And I would certainly fear with less control by the messengers since their percentage is shrinking. After we talked last week, I went back and dug a little bit in the annuals, and I saw some other folks on Twitter were actually doing the same, looking at the designated numbers. The Cooperative Program number came out this week. I think you mentioned it in the lead-in, and those numbers have been reported to be flat. Well, they're flat, but in a context against a time when inflation has been 20 or 30%, right? We're down still 4 or 5% from the peak in 2022, I think, or 2021, I think it was. And so we're down 5 or 10% from that. But buying power of that is a lot less, and we've not kept up with inflation. So the power of those dollars, even if the report says, well, it was strong. Well, strong means it met the requirement, the 10% requirement in January. We got that in, that budget amount. But overall, that is still flat compared to inflation. It buys a lot less than it did. And then we see the enormous growth of designated giving. In the BP story about it this week, it said, well, designated giving was flat. But that's not really the case. There's two kinds of designated giving. Some people send their designated giving through Nashville. So I'm going to send a check to Nashville and say, but I'm designating my money to IMB or NAMB or the seminaries or whatever it might be. But then you're also free to send designated money around Nashville and to the institutions themselves. So even of the money sent to Nashville now, the majority is designated giving, which is a huge change. cooperative program budget's $180 million. January is about 10% of the annual income. And so if the predictions hold, you would expect to see designated giving through Nashville of $200 million, more than the cooperative program. And that's not a good sign if the cooperative program is supposed to be your primary driver. And then when you then go in and add in the designated giving around Nashville to the entities directly, Ben Cole, Baptist blogger this week, said he'd gone back to 2010, and IMB has reported in 2010, they only got $9 million designated. Overall designated giving this year is up 700% compared to 2010. So massive changes in where churches are sending their money. They're not sending it to Nashville as much. Who gets designated funds? Overwhelmingly, that money goes to NAMB and to IMB, foreign missions and home missions. The seminaries get a very tiny amount of designated giving out of that overall. And I think it's single-digit percents out of the whole. So the vast majority of designated funds is going to go to these two giant mission boards. And already the case is designated giving now is outpacing the cooperative program. And so obviously people are feeling their oats. If the convention system, the cooperative program, the annual meeting system isn't getting us our majority, then what's this doing? Are we going to try to keep this, or is it time for a new paradigm? And those are huge discussions that will affect what local Southern Baptist churches and how they relate to the cooperative program.
Right. And so the reason this matters, at least my take on it would be, is that if designated giving is already outpacing just general cooperative program giving, then as we've said, as we've warned, the cooperative program is breaking, if not broken. And the numbers show it. But why? When we're talking about budgetary matters, why does it matter where dollars go? Well, fundamentally, people will not give to what they do not trust. That's really the underlying, the foundational ground level thing here. Why would any average Southern Baptist church stop writing the checks to the cooperative program? Well, it's because they don't trust what's happening. They don't trust the leadership. They don't like what's happening. They have concerns. And it's not just because they decided, oh, I would rather do designated giving in some sort of strange vacuum. There was a reason to change how they are giving. And that reason, whatever it is, theological, cultural, political, management, it's not a good reason. And so, we're talking about these numbers because the numbers, Jesus reminds us that, from the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. Well, from, the overflow of the checkbook, the heart speaks here for Southern Baptists. And it's really concerning. And I think this, for my take on it would be, John, is that there has been a massive loss of trust from Nashville to the Southern Baptist churches.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think part of that is, it's not because Southern Baptist churches have changed.
Yes.
And really, it's not because Southern Baptist churches have become more individualistic. When you look at where they send the money.
Wait, we're not all expressive individualists, John?
Yeah, they want it to go towards missions. And so the question, though, then becomes, how are we as Southern Baptists showing that even when you send money to missions, that it's the best return on your dollars? I heard somebody this week talking about the Baptist Heart for Missions and how it would be great if we could all get behind missions. That's great. But it seems to me we're asking churches right now to give money, for example, to NAMB, and we don't know how many churches they've planted. So how is it you would encourage the next generation of givers, Southern Baptists, greatest generation, boomer generation, even late Gen X, still faithful givers? How is it we convince new pastors, new churches who would be independent Baptists or non-denominational? How do we convince them that the cooperative program going forward is the best method for their dollars? How do we remake that sale? And the sense I get is we don't think we can make the sale. We got to keep it quiet, and we got to hide the fact that it's declining, and we have to keep up good appearances, even as the air goes out of the balloon, as somebody said. And that's real. And so for folks like you and me and average Baptist churches, we're worried about making this sale to the next generation of Baptists. And I'm afraid the discussions in those meeting rooms are not, how do we make the sale back to the Cooperative Program? But okay, that's dead. What's new, and how do we all benefit from it?
Right. And, I think one of the things that's really important here too is, as you and I, coming from sort of the ecclesiological background we would have, healthy churches, numbers aren't necessarily a reflection of health, things like that. Like, you and I are people who are like, oh man, we love it when all the churches are posting all their big Cooperative Program giving numbers, but we're latching onto this because it's showing us something. And, really, so the issues is, you pull the camera back, it's things like wokeness, liberal drift. So you've got wokeness, liberal drift. Then you've got massive convention mismanagement, particularly from the abuse crisis disaster that's been unfolding. And then, you have sort of like the ERLC in particular as like a big one. It's like, why are churches not giving? Why is trust down? And so it's not that we just want to see, the green line go up. We want to see the convention be healthy, right? Whether it's, and what's happening here is our leaders over the last decade plus now, they seem willing to try anything and everything except fixing the real problems in the convention, because to do so would mean that they would have to stop being Baptist nice.
Yeah, I mean, there was a editorial First Things this week about a Catholic university that wasn't living up to its standards, and the author there described the fear of leaders, and that really strikes me as what the issue is that there's deep fear amongst national leaders that not enough people believe what Baptists say they believe to fund us like we'd like to be funded, or like we could be funded. And so then you start thinking, well, if we could just reach out and grab the churches with female pastors, if we could just reach out and grab this diverse ethnic group or that ethnic group, if we could just expand beyond the people that really believe what Baptists believe, then we might have enough money. And in that case, then the money starts driving the fellowship. And I think that's exactly opposite. I think churches want a Southern Baptist Convention that is united by doctrine, is as big as we could possibly be given that doctrine, but no bigger than that. And so really holding the line on the convention being the size of the number of churches that believe what Baptists believe, that's really important. That makes it hard on leaders. That I understand is an instruction that makes it a little bit harder on our leaders, because they have to then go have churches, converts, new baptisms that really are educated in the Baptist system, Baptist beliefs, Baptist doctrine. But time after time, you see new leaders come up and go, I didn't know we were Southern Baptists. I don't really know what Southern Baptists believe. I just know I believe the Bible. That's great. There's lots of churches like that in America, but the Baptist Convention was designed to be as big as we can be under the doctrinal umbrella we have. And kind of covert attempts to expand the tent, make the tent a little bit bigger, sneak the edges out a little bit farther, so that we can avoid having the hard conversation about, do we really believe that when we look at the Baptist faith and message, that is, in fact, God's plan for the world. That's the best we can do, is to follow the Bible as we've indicated in our statement of faith. Or do we say, well, that's nice for some people, but let's take the money from others? Eventually, the money from others, instead of being an addition, starts to be the majority and guiding the outcome. And so the boat becomes steered by those outside funds. And so that's a real concern. Baptists want to be very careful in those conversations as we're moving forward.
But it's been a bad gamble. It's been a bad bet. I mean, if this had been a good bet, then the Cooperative Program giving would be going up and everything would be fine. But they, over the last 10 years, and, Mark Devine's so good when he writes for us at CBL and other places, just talking about the seeker sensitivity to the left that infected the Southern Baptist Convention. But the seeker sensitivity to the left, this desire for the funds or the churches or the partnerships with other sources, has really been outweighed by just your average conservative Southern Baptist church saying, I have had enough, I am out. For anybody watching the video version of this, you can see that I'm not at home. I'm in a hotel room, and on the road here, I'm in Texas. just yesterday, I was talking to somebody who's at a 1689 Reformed Baptist Church, not part of the SBC, don't want to be a part of the SBC. And they asked me though, like, and they were telling me about another church that left the Southern Baptist Convention specifically because of what the ERLC did, signing that letter to oppose a bill of abortion abolition in Louisiana. And he said, how could a church be in the Southern Baptist Convention and not feel like they are supporting that? Or if a church wanted to be in the Southern Baptist Convention, and I'm actually, believe it or not, I'm out on the road, John, trying to get churches, the conservative churches, to join the Southern Baptist Convention, but they want to know how they can join us and not in any way be contributing to actions like that. And that's just one example. I said, well, you can join and you can designate your giving and do everything you can to make sure that not one red cent goes to the ERLC. But those are the churches that have left and are leaving and will continue to leave until this is fixed.
Well, and so two things there. One, notice who was not at the meeting in Dallas we're talking about now. Not the ERLC, not the seminaries. And so based on what we talked about last week, there is support, I think, probably to say, if the ERLC is a distraction, then part of the future is not including the ERLC. So that's an interesting development there. But yeah, exactly what you're talking about. The more trickery we use to make it look like things are okay or to stay stable, right? Let's go take the government money that we never took before, but now we are. And now we can say we've got a vibrant ministry funded by the government. That's not good. If you look at National Association of Evangelicals, their very tiny social service organization grew to $160 million annually on government funds. The denomination's budget is about $2 million. So they're 80 times larger than the denomination based on government funds. Well, guess what their leaders do in their off time? They speak to promote using government funds for ministry. That's never been Southern Baptists. Southern Baptists have always said, we'll give up good government money in order to maintain a consistent witness as Baptists. And so the question is, do our leaders feel comfortable with that anymore? Or are we going to see increasingly tricky ways to make it look like we're still growing when we are, in fact, just expanding the tent to people that don't believe like us?
Well, speaking of potentially increasingly tricky ways, we have also heard, and we're making this public on the Center for Baptist Leadership podcast right now. Maybe some people already know this. We've heard and we know that Vance Pitman, the current president of the SEND network of the North American Mission Board, is leaving that role. That's been made officially known by Kevin Ezell to the trustees and to, I think, really sort of like every NAMB employee. For some reason, it's not been made public yet, but it's been made known to NAMB employees, for a while now. There was an official letter that went out about Vance Pitman leaving the SEND network. And while he's leaving his role as president of the SEND network, he's not totally leaving. It sounds like he's sort of shifting things around. And look, this is a reliable source that I have this from, but I don't have, the exact jots and tittles of everything. So nobody hold me to it. But we heard that he's actually joining something called SEND Ventures Initiative, which is a new thing that I've not heard about before. SEND Ventures Initiative. So he'll be doing that, not being the president of the SEND network. He'll also be working on his preaching and coaching ministry and the church consulting services that he can offer to individuals, which would include churches outside of the Baptist faith and message and, the constraint of Baptist dollars. So his role with SEND network is changing, but he's not entirely leaving the orbit. From what I understand, SEND Ventures Initiative is sort of part of this new fundraising apparatus for SEND network. And so, it'll be interesting to see what happens there. Apparently the letter went to the trustees on January 20th. So we're coming up on close to a month here since that was announced. It said things like it's going to allow him to shift more of his focus to help NAMB reach its goals through SEND Ventures Initiative. So that's interesting. And this is also, I think this might play into NAMB having brought on David Nasser, which, I don't know much about David Nasser. I don't have anything negative to say about him, but David Nasser's been brought in what we understand to be some sort of fundraising role for NAMB. And it's just all very interesting because fundamentally, you think of NAMB and there's a lot we could say about what is going on with SEND and everything that's developed there. But NAMB is just supposed to be, the home missions, church planting organization for the SBC, which means they should be taking Baptist dollars to help plant Baptist churches. But there's a lot more going on there. John, what's your reaction to the news of Vance Pitman's career change?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, your eyes go up anytime there's a new entity organization announced, right? The SBC documents are written so that the convention has to approve any change in ministry assignment, and two, it has to approve any new corporations that are formed on behalf of the convention. Send Relief, great organization. Send Relief does lots of great things. Disaster ministry, it's a core Southern Baptist ministry. But Send Relief was really interestingly formed. It's the old Brotherhood, or it's the old Radio and TV Commission corporation that Baptist dissolved that entity, but apparently somebody kept the corporation alive. And so NAMB decided, rather than ask the convention to open a new corporation and approve new bylaws, it took that old corporation and said, well, this has already been approved and we can stick Send Relief in there. And so the convention doesn't directly elect the directors of Send Relief. It query if somebody wanted to instruct them or give them instructions, would they honor those instructions, or is that separation, again, a step away from measures of control? So when we hear about a new Send initiatives, well, it sounds like a change in ministry assignment that the trustees should bring to the convention, but we haven't seen that request yet. Maybe it'll pop up here at the executive committee this week. But again, I am always concerned when entities are trying to do things as officially as they can without bringing to the convention what it needs to decide. And if there's going to be a new expansion into non-SBC churches or to fundraising, that's supposed to come to the convention. And so will somebody hold them to that?
Yeah, well, this gets back to the rewritten business and financial plan that gave more latitude to our entities to do outside of convention fundraising, which was a major concern that we raised. But it will be interesting to watch. I think it's no secret, and this has even been said in different ways, but I think there is an effort within SEND to sort of replace or even sort of like run the SBC. I think in many ways they're kind of building like an SBC within the SBC. And this just sort of seems like another part of that.
That they're the one entity, quasi-entity, that we know has taken government funds under a government contract back with the Biden administration to help resettle refugees or asylum seekers in Massachusetts. So again, what you don't want to see is what happened with World Relief at NAE, where the social services comes to dominate the denomination and the denomination's cash flow. That I think would be a mistake. And so, Baptists need to be asked before we take out on some new initiative they didn't approve.
Yeah. So this is the post-cooperative program future that's barreling down the timeline at us. I continue to believe that we could do a lot of things that we just should do as Baptists to save this. I mean, you've said this before, you said it last time. It's not that our Baptist beliefs and convictions have been tried and found wanting. It's that they've not been tried. And this really does too underscore, John, just something that I keep coming back to, which is the executive committee leadership really matters for the convention. And, I know we get kind of caught up in the sort of the presidential election, and it's important every year or 2 years we elect a new, president. But it is the executive committee that has the power, and they stay and they wait out the presidents that they don't like and work more closely with the ones that they do. They are the SBC deep state that you can take that just flatly. They are the SBC bureaucracy, the enduring institution. There's a great book, I'll recommend it here, called National Security and Double Government that explains why, just bear with me for a second, that explains why as presidents change, as U.S. presidents change, despite whatever policies they run on that sort of contradict each other, at the end of the day, a lot of things like foreign policy and national security just remain the same regardless of who was elected or why. And it's because of the entrenched power of the bureaucracy. There was a British philosopher and thinker who called it sort of the difference between sort of like the efficient institutions and the sort of the public institutions. I'm forgetting the name he used there. And the Southern Baptist Convention Executive Committee is our efficient institution that really runs things. And so I think we should get Willy Rice elected. But I mean, I think we need a new visionary Baptist leader who wants us to be Baptist to be running the executive committee, probably more than anything else.
Yeah. I mean, obviously the executive committee in theory is the individual members of the committee are the ones that are supposed to represent the whole during the year, right? They're the ones that are supposed to think about how does this affect small churches and large churches? How does it affect my region? How does it affect other ministries? And as we have said over time, kind of like Congress, I'm not sure it's functioning like it was intended to. I would feel a whole lot better if there was a meeting between every member of the executive committee and 30 churches than I would if there were a meeting between a few entity leaders to talk about the post-cooperative program, SBC. Those leaders are there really to respect, if there were to be a post-CP convention, they're the ones that need to be involved in the midterm and then bring those questions to the messengers. Like you said, the most important part is to have people in those seats, in those offices, as president and in the entity boards that really do reflect Baptist principles and are willing to say, I believe so strongly in those. I'm willing to say no if it goes outside those principles. I'm willing to stay as big as we are if it means more doctrinal faithfulness, more consistency, as opposed to chasing every dollar that anyone thinks is a good idea. That's my concern. And so folks like Willy Rice, that's the change I hope we make.
Right. And to that point, there's a lot of changes at our entities that are coming. And you and I have both heard that Jeff Orge is not perhaps super long for the executive committee, president and CEO gig. But say Willy wins in Orlando and then say Jeff resigns later in the fall. It's not Willy Rice style executive committee members who are picking our next executive committee president and CEO. It's J.D. Greer and Bart Barber and Ed Litton people. And so we kind of we're sort of been missing some windows lately, but what it does is it underscores the need to get like Willy Rice's as our presidents for the next 10 years. Like this project, which I know people are in many ways exhausted with. They ask, can we win? Are we winning anything, getting anything? It's kind of like, the project of the rest of the 2020s into the early 2030s, right? It's like Project 2035 for the SBC. By 2035, have we had 10 years of rocked rib, actually Baptist conservative presidents who have replaced all these committee members. And so then we get the new leaders in. Do we get the Al Mohler of 1993 as the executive committee president finally? So hang in there, guys.
Yeah, we are just now getting the first influence of Clint Presley's first year. Right. So up until now, the trustees have been or that are currently there have been either Greer, Litton, or Barber appointees. So we're just now. And Clint Presley's leaving, right? But he had to pick a group of 100 friends, and then those friends picked a group of 100 friends, and then those folks picked nominees for the boards. And so the process is delayed. We're just now getting evidence of who it is Clint's friends on the committees have kind of influentially picked. I've heard some good reports about those. That's exciting, but we still have 3 or 4 years before I think presidents who've been concerned about doctrinal accountability have named majorities of boards. And that's just the process. Even with Willy Rice, Willy Rice will have an effect when Willy leaves. And so it's important to always be thinking about a sustained plan to have conservative Southern Baptists on these institutions.
Yeah, that's right. And I have great hope that Clint's picks will be better than many of the previous years. I'm not trying to cut that in any way, shape, or form. I trust they will be. Clint's been a breath of fresh air in many ways, shapes, and forms. But let's move on from this. There's so much more we could say, and I'm sure we'll keep circling back to the post-cooperative program future, but there was a lot to discuss there. Let's talk about Heath Lambert's name change video and just the fun. I've pulled up just sort of one section of it here that we can play and react to.
Because names communicate meaning, Southern Baptists might consider changing their name to Baptists Debating the Existence of Women Pastors. We could call it BDUP for short. I admit it's not the most exciting name, but it does have the virtue of telling the truth. There's nothing particularly exciting about the name of my church, the First Baptist Church of Jacksonville, Florida, but every word in it is important. It's the same for BDUP. What it loses in style, it gains in honesty about what we do every year when we get together. The SBC started its contemporary debate about the issue of women preachers in Anaheim, California in 2022. The issue has drawn massive attention every year since. It's certain to come up again in 2026, creating a 5-year stretch of distraction on a straightforward issue. How did we get here? The SBC believes local churches are independent and cannot be controlled by the convention. But the SBC reserves the same freedom for itself that it confesses for local churches. That means the SBC is free to say which independent local churches it will cooperate with and which ones it will not. For years, Southern Baptists have operated under the assumption that our confessional statement, the Baptist Faith and Message, or the BFM, controls which churches can be in friendly cooperation with our convention and which ones cannot. In 2022, the committee Southern Baptists used to determine the churches considered to be in good standing raised a question about this established practice. In response to several churches in the convention who had female pastors, they wondered whether the prohibition against female pastors in the BFM was intended to create a standard for convention membership. They asked Southern Baptists to give them guidance. Most Southern Baptists were immediately alarmed that a crucial convention committee did not believe our very clear confessional document provided enough guidance. In every meeting since, Southern Baptists have been trying to supply the requested guidance.
All right. Well, I appreciate Heath's video there for many reasons. One is I think you can sense the exhaustion somebody like Heath has with this continuing debate that we've been having for 5 years now. And he does a great job in the longer video sort of recounting the history and where we've been, as you heard there, and where we're going. And, I think Heath, like many others, want to see a solution here. And so, what did you think of Heath's video, John? How did you find it?
I admit he got me. A2 Heath, yet another name change proposal. And so I got that kind of clenched feeling of, oh, this is a bad idea again. And then, as time went on, I was like, well, probably Heath is not really going to change the name of this convention. And so then the video came out, and he makes a great point, and both humorously and in somewhat of a frustrated way says, why is this dragging on? Can't we, if we have unity about anything, can't we decide this matter is done? And so those that voted against the law amendment in the past, many of them claimed they did so because they thought the current system would work. And as Heath has said, it hasn't. We've got this ongoing debate, and folks that are pushing for it are hoping there's some crack in the wall, right? People get tired, or they go out to Disney World during the break, and then a church gets accepted, and then there's reason to doubt the firmness of our convictions. So when you have firm convictions, you don't want to test them every convention repeatedly. You want to settle the issue. And I think Heath exactly expresses the frustration of so many of us that if we're going to be unified, we need to also be unified and get this resolved. How do we do that? Given the prior votes, we're going to try something new. I think it's important to try something new in a way that can give clarity to this issue and not gum up our convention every year.
Yeah, it's really remarkable when you consider the history of the law amendment votes, where after a year of Mike Law just sort of very patiently but doggedly defending and advancing the need for his amendment, that it was ultimately brought to the floor, but was recommended against by the platform. And yet it was overwhelmingly supported. I was standing in the back of the room in New Orleans when that vote happened, and it was a big vote. Was it 75% or was it 80%? I don't know, but it was a big vote. It was over the 2/3 threshold because Baptists got it. And then, John, the machine spun up against it. I don't know if they were surprised that it won. It's like, okay, we're going to bring this out. We're going to recommend against it. We're going to kick out Rick Warren at the same time. And we're going to trust everybody realizes we don't need this and we don't want it. Well, that's not how it went, right? And so then the reason it's lost the last couple of years, I mean, I would just put it really on, we're trying to be very, statesman-like here. Misinformation, just a lot of misinformation from people who should know better about this. And they've all been proven wrong at this point, just undeniably. Like the people who said we didn't need the amendment have been proven wrong. And so now this is where I want to go with this. This gets into the election. I think it really matters. And we're already seeing sort of why and where it matters between Willy Rice and Josh Powell, because Willy wants to propose a solution that will solve this for us. For sure and certain. And it's like on the top of his list. And Josh, even though he voted for the amendment 3 times, if you watch the recent podcast interview that he did with some of his friends there in South Carolina, it just doesn't seem to be that big of an issue for Josh. Do you think that's a fair summary of the video?
Well, I noted that his co-host said, well, I didn't vote for the law amendment because I didn't think we needed it. And the response was, well, we can all agree and move on forward. And so, yeah, I mean, again, as I've said, the danger of leadership, the danger of fiduciary duty is that people do things that are easier on themselves and not what's best for the convention. And so what we saw from the platform was, well, don't give us a hard rule. That'll make it a little bit harder on us. We don't want to be known for division. So why don't we all pretend this doesn't matter? You can vote against it, and then I'll go handle it in the back room, and it'll all work out okay. That was the promise, and the Baptists trust their leaders. They want to think the best of their leaders. Okay, we're going to make it no harder than it has to be if they'll promise to get it done. The promise was made, and then the promise was broken because it didn't get it done. It comes back year after year, and it's caused more confusion, not less. And so time to admit the promise that if you let me do it the easy way, it'll all work out was not a solid promise. And if nothing else needs to change, that needs to change. We need to admit that didn't occur like we were told it was going to occur. And so now we are in a situation where something has to be done because this is causing division and frustration. Another one of those things that bleeds into the Cooperative Program like we talked about earlier.
Yeah, I mean, I think that really is. So if you're listening to this, you're a Southern Baptist, pastor or potential messenger coming to Orlando. I mean, I think you want to vote for somebody who has a clear plan to do something about this, not just let it go and move on, because, it's like whack-a-mole or cutting off the head of a hydra. They say, as you said, oh, we'll take care of this in the back rooms. And it's like, well, then, every time the Credentials Committee renders some decision on a church that clearly has female pastors and says you're good to go, and then it makes the news story. Well, so then we bring one up right before the ratification of the law amendment, FBC Alexandria, one of the most notorious, sort of violators of the female pastor thing. Okay, so we deal with them. And they're like, look, we can deal with it. Okay, but then you have Abba's house, and then you have Fielder Church, which, man, Heath takes Fielder Church to the woodshed in that video, and good for him. Because again, it's just like, look, Fielder, if you want to have women pastors, or if you want to play semantic name games to have female pastors, but try to dupe us Southern Baptists, why don't you just not be in the SBC? Right? Just like make your life easier, make our life easier. But because that's not happening, because these somewhat, these definitely egalitarian, maybe subversive intentionally or not, churches aren't going to leave on their own. We have to make them leave. And so we need a president who's going to solve this issue for us, because I'm not sure how it gets solved outside of that at this point.
Yeah. There are really good pastors in the Southern Baptist Convention that are good at avoiding controversy. We're not in that time. We have controversy. We need somebody that can handle controversy and knows how to resolve it. And I think in this race, that probably is Willy Rice. Willy standing up and talking about changes he wants to be made. not to cast dispersions, but the time is we have controversy that needs to be resolved, and Will is willing to embrace it, not just try again. The problem is not lack of encouragement in the SBC. The problem is shying away from criticism and disagreement. And so Willy seems to me to be the man for this hour.
Yeah, that was really well said, John. And I just add to it that, you're not a controversial person just by acknowledging the fact that controversy exists.
Right.
And in fact, if you're proposing solutions to controversy, you're actually the peacemaker. Whereas if the controversy exists and you're saying peace, peace, you're actually the one who's perpetuating problems for the convention.
Right.
So,
right.
Yeah. Yeah. So, okay. So last topic of discussion for us here today, John, you have caused no small stir with a recent article that you published at the Center for Baptist Leadership, one that I didn't really even ask for. You just sent it to me. And it was sort of, summarizing two major, there's multiple cases, but you honed in on these two, particularly related to this question of, can Southern Baptist entities say false things about pastors and other employees of particularly Baptist state conventions, and get away with it because so-called religious freedom? It's the McRaney case and the Garner case. So, John, why? And obviously this was spurred on by the fact that McRaney filed a petition to the Supreme Court in his case. Pretty big news in Baptist life, mostly ignored by everybody who's any sort of leading individual in the Southern Baptist Convention, but covered by others, and including us. So, John, what's going on here and why is it so important?
Yeah. So, and my inbox is full of letters from angry lawyer friends. Like, what are you talking about? We all support church autonomy. And of course we do. A key constitutional doctrine that's protected religious liberty in America is the idea that churches can internally govern themselves. But we have these two hard cases in SBC life. One is Will McRaney, and it's been going on for 4 or 5 years now. McRaney was fired. McRaney says, in essence, NAMB he was the head of the Maryland Delaware Convention, and he was pushing back against some of NAMB's requirements for church planting and under what we call cooperation agreements between the National Convention and the state conventions. The Baptist system, the convention has always promised that the National Convention exerts no power over the state convention. That's the way we've been set up. That's what's supposed to happen. They're supposed to be peers. They're not supposed to exercise the governance over each other. McRaney says NAMB, in essence, blackmailed the Maryland Convention and came to them and said, our money is cutting off. You'll get no money as long as Will McRaney remains your head. And so the convention met in emergency session, their executive committee, and they fired Will McRaney. I believe it was 2015. And then they replaced him thereafter with Kevin Smith, who was a young pastor, friendly to NAMB. So in essence, McRaney says NAMB wanted to force its person on the state convention, and that violates Baptist polity. The second part of McRaney's complaint, though, is that, and then NAMB called all my Baptist friends at Baptist institutions all over and called me both a bad Baptist and said I broke the contract, that I didn't give them notice on things I was supposed to give them notice, and that I was an incompetent administrator because of that. And so in essence, cost him any chance to have income at other supposedly independent Baptist groups. And so the question is, how can you do that? And so he files his lawsuit, and it has wound its way through the courts. Two parts of the argument that get made, I think, are concerning. Now, let me say this. I mean, I think in some ways, lots of Will McRaney's complaints are, in fact, going to have to be resolved by Baptists, right? Courts won't make Baptists live by their own rules. And so if NAMB breaks the Baptist rules, there's only so much a court can do. The court is not going to look at the SBC Annual and say, well, NAMB broke some kind of Baptist bylaw. We're going to have to hold NAMB accountable. And so some of McRaney's complaints fall into that bucket. There's some of his stuff he's probably going to have to take the convention. But there were two arguments that really caught people's eye. One was that, well, whenever a state convention joins with a national convention in some kind of cooperation agreement, NAMB argued that church autonomy means none of the members of those organizations can complain about defaming each other in the process of that. And that goes against Baptist polity. But B, it's never been the case in the Baptist church that when you join First Baptist Church, that you then somehow are in a internal governance relationship with NAMB. That's the constitutional phrase. First Amendment doctrine is churches can exercise internal governance, and courts can't interfere with that. And so by stretching the definition of internal governance to say, well, when two conventions work together, one convention can defame the leader, a leader of one can defame the leader of another, that doesn't seem to be what Baptists usually signed up for. And the way the court got there was to say, well, that's an implication of joining together. If you join one church, then you submit to government by all the people it cooperates with. That's not what Baptists believe. I don't think that's a good legal principle, that just by joining one church, you submit to the internal governance of the others and can be defamed by members of the others. I think that'd be a bad rule for Baptists. And the problem with making it a constitutional rule is it's hard to opt out of, right? Say the Baptists wanted to do it the Baptist way. Well, now with a constitutional rule, it's hard to write documents that could preserve what Baptists believe about the independence of various Baptist bodies. And then the second real problem was, granted, it may be a small part of the case, but McRaney alleged that NAMB was making secular lies, religiously motivated perhaps, but making secular lies about his incompetence as an administrator to go badmouth him or blackball him elsewhere in the convention. I don't think the courts should erase tort liability. I think everyone should still have the duty to be honest. You can't drag somebody into court for calling you a bad Baptist. You can't drag them into court for saying, you practiced the Lord's Supper wrong, or you baptized wrong, or you're a liberal. None of that can be adjudicated by courts. That's for churches to decide internally. But if you say, well, I don't think he's qualified because he beats his wife, and that's false, or you don't care if it's true or not, or he's a child molester, or he's a thief, or he's a tax evader, whatever it is that could defame somebody, those secular lies, even though they're made with religious motivations, the religious motivation doesn't give religious groups freedom to tell lies about each other. And I frankly don't want a world in which churches claim that power, right? I would prefer they said, we care so much about the truth. You look at it and you sue me, that's on you, but we're going to tell the truth. We're always going to live by the duty to tell the truth as best we can, not to be reckless, not to make false statements. And so the implication of how McRaney says, here are secular lies about me in a religious context, the court dealt with that in not a very satisfactory way in the final opinion in McRaney, the Fifth Circuit opinion of McRaney. Now, he's asked the Supreme Court to take it up, probably a long shot at this point, just the statistics on what the court can take. It doesn't have to take it. It gets to take a very few cases. And so the question is, will it interfere here? So much of what the Fifth Circuit lays out in its opinion, there's a section 2 that talks about the doctrine of church autonomy. So much of that is great. I'm glad to see it in print. I'm glad to see judges wrestling with those topics and a very clear statement of what the church autonomy doctrine is. But when it came to apply it to Baptist principles and the specific facts of Will McRaney, I think it came up short. Relatively small portion of the case, but important, because I don't want a denomination that rips out its foundations and claims the power to lie about each other. Even if our leaders today are angels and don't do that, our leaders tomorrow will. And so that's what I don't think there's any good reason to say the law won't respect secular lies, even if they're made with religious motivations. That's the McRaney case. And we'll see if the Supreme Court gets involved to address those issues. I saw you signed a brief with other Baptist leaders asking the court to take it up. We'll see if it does. But that's the McRaney case.
Yeah, I mean, and so in your article, thank you for that explanation. I think your article really, puts it really clear. You say that defamation liability would not strip the SBC of the power to police doctrine, If a convention wants to say a minister teaches error, it may say so freely. But if it wants to say a minister is a thief or an abuser, it must be careful to tell the truth or answer for the lie, just like anyone else. Right. And so like that, it's really, I think when you just kind of boil it down to sort of lay people's terms out of the legalese, the idea that just because you're working for a religious organization, that they could then do things that, materially affect your ability, harm, or even end your ability to get gainful employment elsewhere based on false statements about you and your character. It just sounds shockingly dangerous and not anything that people would expect to be included in so-called First Amendment religious liberty.
Yeah, and I think that's the traditional line. Like we were saying, the SBC is protected today under the First Amendment. It needs no new law, no new cases for if the convention says, hey, that pastor's a woman and that doesn't meet our biblical guidelines, we're not going to fellowship with you anymore. That decision is absolutely positively protected. No court in America will touch it. I'll take that case on for free because it's going to win pretty quick if the convention makes a religious judgment about how its doctrine applies to the facts. But it can't make up false facts that harm that person to get rid of them out of the convention. Can't say, well, you don't meet our standards because you beat your wife and you don't really know that he beats his wife, right? Or know that that's false. That kind of lie injures you not only in the community, you probably can't make you stay in the convention, but if you broadcast that lie to others and it harms them, I think the law should allow you to recover, should at least impose a duty of care. You have to be reasonably careful and you have to try to tell the truth. And if you're not telling the truth or you're not reasonably careful and you're spreading defamation about religious ministers, just because it's in the religious context doesn't mean a jury can't consider that. I think that would be a mistake to have in the law. And so, like I said, the McRaney opinion jumps around it, doesn't deal with it directly, tries to avoid it, and so doesn't come down in a very satisfying way about what that rule looks like in the future. In part because it said, well, whenever groups join together, there's this broad protection. And again, I've said, I don't think Baptists wanted that. I'm not sure how you'd contract out of it now if it's the constitutional rule. So that's McRaney. That case is, we're going to see where that's going to go. And that would have been that. Then we come to Garner, the Garner case in Tennessee. And that case just got heard by the Supreme Court of Tennessee on appeal. And Preston Garner is a music minister in East Tennessee. And he says that during kind of the height of the SBC abuse nonsense, the Credentials Committee apparently received an anonymous phone call unsupported to the hotline that accused him of being sexually abusing a minor. There was no support to the claim. There's nothing that makes that claim particularly credible. Nothing about the report pointed to other evidence that said, well, here's some way you could verify this. A bare allegation, this individual abused a child. The Credentials Committee then immediately developed a questionnaire and sent it to the local church and to the Tennessee Convention and said, why are you still cooperating? Why are you still employing somebody who's been credibly accused of abuse? Now, Garner had just quit his original church to take a new worship pastor position at another larger church in town. And so, of course, what happens with the letter? The letter, I understand the Tennessee Convention forwards it to the new employer. And the new employer says, whoa. Well, we can't have a person credibly accused of sexual abuse on the staff until you clear your name. Then it got forwarded to the Christian school that Garner was the music director at. And his grandkids went there. And the school said, whoa, until you clear your name of this credible accusation, we can't have you on campus. And so the end result is Garner loses his job, loses his church. He can't even set foot on campus anymore with his grandchildren to see their sporting events because he's been banned from campus because of this allegation. And so Garner quite rightly says, what do I need to do to clear my name? Where's the trial process? How do I show this was not a credible allegation against me? And the convention says, there is no way. There's no justice for you. We're sorry about that, but we don't have a process for that. And so Garner went, I think, and got a polygraph. Yeah, and polygraphs may or may not be admissible, but just to show, I've never abused anyone. And I think he's done some investigation and found maybe there was somebody who was making a string of complaints against certain ministers that weren't credible. Police had never acted on them. There was no police report, no additional evidence, just a bare allegation. And Preston Garner, as a music minister, can't go to his kids' basketball games anymore, his grandkids' basketball games anymore. And there's no process by which he can, inside the SBC, clear his name. So he goes and hires a lawyer, and the lawyer brings a claim in Tennessee and says, this is defamation by false light. You knew facts that would show this wasn't really a credible claim, but by broadcasting all over, you've injured my client. And the SBC's response is, oh, well, no, you can't take that to the courts. You need to take that to the church. Well, he tried. He tried to take it, and there was no SBC remedy available. And so he's caught in catch-22. So the trial court found for Garner, said that states a claim, we can proceed and go to trial, towards trial. And the SBC appealed, and the state appeals court said that states a claim, you can head on towards trial. The SBC appealed again and brought in new lawyers, and those lawyers argued, Judge, we just had a case, the McRaney case, that said even when they allege secular torts, the case still gets dismissed. And so we say maybe we didn't intend to give a false impression, but even if we did, even if we were reckless, even if we made false statements, that's protected by church autonomy because he's under our internal governance. Is Preston Garner in the Southern Baptist Convention? No. Is he joined? No. Is he an employee? No. Is his school in the SBC? No. So how is it that internal governance has all of these external effects if the speaker can make secular defamation intentionally or recklessly? That, to me, is really a problem. And so we'll see what the Tennessee court does. But at the oral arguments, they were asking hard questions about, well, if we let the Catholics do this, how can we discriminate against the Baptists? And I talked about that a little bit in the article. That is not a game the Baptists want to play. The Baptists don't want to be treated like the Catholics. And it's short-sighted to say, well, because the Catholics get to do something of their structure, and we're not structured like that, but we should get to do that too, or it's discrimination. No. When Garner goes forward to join a Baptist church, he doesn't join in fellowship with Nashville. Nashville is not a new set of bishops like the Pope is in Rome. And I want the First Amendment to protect Catholics. I want their lawyers to stand up and argue for what's best for them in their situation. But the law shouldn't treat Baptists like Catholics when Baptist individuals who join their churches have structured their relationships to say, I don't give any authority to the SBC to lie about me. And yet the SBC says, by you joining a Southern Baptist affiliated church that cooperates with us, that in our internal documents, we say we would never exercise any authority over the local church. And yet, how is it that a music minister can't go to his grandkids' basketball games because of false and reckless misrepresentations made by the SBC? That really, to me, is a line in the sand that we need to start talking to our leaders about, because if that principle gets into law, that's not a Baptist decision we made about how to be treated. But if we go into the law on the double premise, we should be treated like the Catholics and everybody's under our internal governance. If it wins this case, A, lots of people will get defamed, right? The carelessness will increase. And B, at some point, somebody's going to say, well, if you're all under internal governance, then you're liable for what each other do. And that's what Baptists have tried not to do. And so short-sighted arguments, I think, are going to be really a legal problem. And so the Garner application of McRaney is what led me to bang out that article. So it's not that Jon Whitehead doesn't support church autonomy. I do, properly. But when you join a Baptist church, that doesn't mean the external Baptist bodies can defame you recklessly or intentionally and not have to answer for it in court.
Yeah. I mean, John, thank you for the legal analysis. I'm just sitting here morally aghast at what our leaders are doing. And so it was an anonymous tip. So no name given with no supporting evidence or documentation. Somebody called in and left a message saying Preston Garner is a child sex predator. It's like the worst thing you could accuse somebody of. And so you're saying, then somebody at the credentials committee who has a name, who might, I hope they listen to this and you know what you did, took that and took it seriously and acted on it and just threw every standard that we're given for biblical justice out the window. Testimony of 2 or more witnesses. The first to present his case seems right until another comes along and questions him. I mean, just biblical standards of justice, any standards of, reasonable justice under, American legal systems out the window, hiding under this sort of like Baptist, get out of jail free for defamation zone, wrote letters, sent them out, destroyed his life, and then says you have no recourse. And then when he rightly tries to clear his name, I mean, so these people have names too. What is going on? Why is Jeff Orge hiring lawyers to defend the Southern Baptist Convention instead of apologizing to Preston and asking for his forgiveness? And then hiring lawyers who stand in front of the court representing Southern Baptists saying, well, hey, you know what? It doesn't matter if the Baptists told the truth. It matters if Baptists tell the truth. We're Christians.
Yeah. And I don't blame the lawyers for representing their clients. I represent Baptist leaders for not reining them in, frankly, not telling them, not making sure that they reflect Baptist beliefs. And so it's all too easy to say, well, the lawyers told me to do this, the lawyers told me to do that. The lawyers are there to implement what the Southern Baptist Convention believes. And this is obviously the case where it's essential. You have somebody that in hard moments in conference rooms says that doesn't line up with what we believe. I've been around a while. I've known what Baptists have said about how we're supposed to relate to each other, and this doesn't line up with what I think is supposed to happen. Why do we have leaders in place that don't have a long history with Southern Baptists? Well, at the executive committee and the credentials committee, there was an entire generation of folks wiped out in the 2021 brouhaha. So we lost all of that experience by folks that said, don't worry, we know what to do. We're the experts. We'll do this right. And they've done it wrong and are injuring people. And I don't want a Southern Baptist Convention that can lie about pastors or laymen. I don't want a Southern Baptist Convention that can lie about victims. In an alternate world, you can imagine somebody says, well, it tells lies about the individual that legitimately claims abuse. I don't want that world either. I want a Southern Baptist Convention that is bound by a higher standard than even truth and justice. That's the Bible. And so for Baptists to go into court and say, well, treat us like somebody else, and now we have a lower standard than the Bible. We have a lower standard than truth and justice. Boy, that hurts. That really hurts to watch leaders rip out the foundations of a convention. And it's so short-sighted. Because who wants to join a convention that can lie about you, right? Who wants to join a convention that, if you send $1 to Lottie Moon, then that means we can also call you a child abuser and end your career. It's
not funny. It's just terrifying. It's horrible.
I don't think people will leave the convention in droves immediately. But how do I make this sale that you should join the Southern Baptist Convention as the most efficient way for you to use your mission dollars when it comes along now with a new implied legal obligation that we can also defame you? It just undermines the core of the Southern Baptist Convention. And so is it any wonder that we are having talks about the post-SBC, post-Cooperative Program SBC, because these decisions really hurt. And whether the courts let us do it or not, we have to act. That we need to talk about this.
Yeah, I mentioned last time that we would play some good cop, bad cop. And, I think, John, even though like on your point about the experience, like I don't care. I don't care if you've never had any experience on the executive committee. Are you a Christian? Have you read your Bible? Do you know we are commanded that you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor? Like you don't need any experience. And this is where, I've seen guys, you and I, we talk a lot about sort of like the ins and outs of what's happening with the system and the politics. But, sometimes I see some of these guys like Mike Stone and Tom Maskell who really come back to like, is there no fear of God before the eyes of our Southern Baptist Convention leaders? Like, do you not fear God that you whoever it was that blessed our lawyers to go into the courtroom and say, you know what, it's okay if the Baptists lie about each other, that you can't actually hold them accountable for that. I mean, to hell with that, literally, John.
As we have discussed, the history was there was fear of man, right? There was so much fear of our image, the watching world in 2020, that we went out and hired secular experts to tell us what to do. And we, even though they clearly had interests opposed to ours, we listened to their advice when they told us we need to set up internal church courts to decide who's credibly accused or not. And did we have the money to do that? No. Did we have the power to make that just? No. Could we do it in a biblical way? No. But the fear of the watching world led us to say, okay, we'll implement that system even though we don't have the money or the time or the resources to do it. It won't look like the courts. It won't be nearly as good as the local magistrate judge. As much as Baptists hate to go to the judge can do it better than Baptists on a rump of their budget. There was no money for it. There was no system for it, no process. And there was never going to be enough money to make it competent and just. And so now we see the results of that fear of man. We said, okay, we'll do it. And now you'll tell us we're a good convention, right? Nobody will complain about how we handle these things. And then you end up steamrolling people like Preston Garner or abuse victims. It wasn't a competent system, so we're going to underfund it. It's not going to have the experience or system it needs. It'll never have enough money that it needs to match what the courts can do. And so those of us that were saying this isn't just, use the magistrate, use the police, use the government tools God has set up, but out of fear of man, out of the hope that somebody would call us, socially just, we adopt this system. It has the predictable effect. Somebody draws the short straw. It's Preston Garner in this case. And then we say, well, we don't have any room left over for him to clear his name. It's pretty disgusting.
Yeah, it is sad. And it's infuriating. You've got me pretty worked up here. I mean, I knew some of the ins and outs of it, but as you just went over it again there, it's like, if this is who we are as Baptists, if this is what our leaders are doing, we really need to, clean house. These days I'm seeing a lot of people on the left using this phrase, a lot of you are sitting at tables that Jesus wants you to flip. They use it for like lefty causes, right? Mm-hmm. But I mean, look, if you're on the executive committee, like, why aren't you flipping the table over the fact that your lawyers are destroying this man's life? And that you guys destroyed this man's life, that the credentials committee, we know who's on the credentials committee. We can find all their names. Why the minute that Preston brought this lawsuit, our leaders didn't say, wow, well, we got this wrong. We sinned against you, brother. We're sorry. We defamed you. We acted unjustly. Please forgive us. What can we do to make this right? That's not what any of them did, which tells me that they're not the leaders that Southern Baptists need right now.
Yeah. Yep.
Well, that was our conversation for the day. So I hope people enjoyed listening to this. Make sure to check out John's article on our website there. It's titled SBC Leaders Are Fighting for the, quote, religious freedom to defame Baptist pastors. And as Randy Adams said, just look at the title. It kind of captures it all, but you should read it. You should share it with your local associations. You should start preparing to come to Orlando now. Book your rooms, make your travel plans, recruit your messengers, and plan to show up and be in the room where it happens, where we can change the direction of some of these things in our convention that direly need to be addressed. Any closing words, John?
Nope. See you next week.
All right. See you next week.
The Center for Baptist Leadership Podcast is powered by American Reformer, hosted by William Wolfe, with audio production by Jared Cummings. Our music is a custom remix of Soldiers of Christ in Truth Arrayed. the official hymn of Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. To help CBL reform and revitalize Christian institutions, please consider making a generous donation today at centerforbaptistleadership.org.